backwards, starting with me. Anyway, we're glad to have the first Wednesday night. I was telling some just a moment ago, it seems like it's been about a month since I was with you, but it's just been a week. It was just last week. But a lot of things happened. I'll just mention real briefly, and this will lead me into telling you something else. When I found out that a good friend of mine, Clayton Burrell, his wife had passed away Tuesday night, or wee hours of Wednesday morning. Make the visitation or the funeral. Well, then Thursday morning, he texted me, would I preach her funeral? Well, I needed to go up then Thursday afternoon, and so I stayed, and I got back home about 11 that night. And then I think it was 11, wasn't it? Yeah, it was about 11 o'clock Thursday night, and prepared for the funeral, and then left about 9 Friday morning, and was gone until about 7 that night. David, you know about that. You're everywhere. Brother Gene goes everywhere. But it was just a long 2 days that I didn't expect. And then Saturday was kind of preparation for the meeting down at Harpersville. And then we had that Sunday, Monday, and last night, and really enjoyed being with the brethren there. Just thoroughly enjoyed it. They're a good group. Some of you might remember Earl Mitchell. He preached there years ago when it first started. I remember I told Brother Bruce Jones, Randy's uncle, and some others who had a lot of confidence in Brother Mitchell. He's still alive. He's 95. He's in a nursing facility. But I remember Midfield supported him, and he would come to meetings, and it was always just a real encourager to me. And he's still alive, but anyway, that he did a lot of good work there. And do you remember him, Randy? I don't know if I asked you. Earl Mitchell, he was just solid rock. And but he was there at Sterrett. Then when the work started, when they moved and built the building at Harpersville, they got a beautiful location right there on Highway 280. It's on a little knoll, if you've ever been there, but it's a great group of people. They're like a lot of us. They're not many in number. I think if I counted everybody in the directory, they'd have 27. And of course, it's hard to get everybody there at one shot. But we had visitors, and last night we probably had the most, but enjoyed that. But I wanted to tell you all of that to tell you that many of you, or I say many, some of you who have been coming with us on our Thursday morning classes, we had really wanted to start in the morning. And because I was gone Thursday and Friday, I don't have our booklets ready. Should have them. So if we could just telling you all that now, if we could plan to start next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, that would help me tremendously. So anything else on that book, kind of not bookkeeping, housekeeping, that anything? I listened to, I started to listen to Brother Gene's lesson from Sunday, and I couldn't listen to all of it. I did listen to the class so I would know where we are. And we really didn't get very far. Charlie had told me that, we'll be in Paul's second journey by the time we would. And what was that, brother? They turned off the mic. Yeah, okay. But tonight is the first Wednesday, and so we do things in reverse, and Brother Jonathan will be giving us a talk, and really look forward to that in just a few moments. All right, in our readings, guess where we've come to? Yes, we're in the New Testament. Tonight would cover down through Matthew 9 and 10. That's the fifth of, that would be number 278. On your reading schedule. Matthew 9 and 10 is actually the 5th of October, if I'm doing my calculations correctly. So we're up to snuff. You can just remember Matthew, primarily to the Jews. Matthew 1, genealogy and birth of the King. And chapter 2, who visit Jesus. The wise men visit, and then they have to go down into, starts with an E, Egypt. They come back, and he's reared in the city of Nazareth. Chapter 3, the work of John the Baptist. And then the baptism. I used to tell young people, I'd say we've got the announcement of the kingdom and the baptism of the King. in chapter 3. Chapter 4, the king, Jesus, immediately goes out to the wilderness and is tempted. Then we move on into Galilee, and we have some events in Matthew 4 that describe the Galilean work. And then at the end of 4, it's almost like a summary that he goes through the regions of Galilee and gives other regions preaching the kingdom of heaven. And then 5, 6, and 7, we're about to get there in our study overall. Chapters 5, 6, and 7, what do we have? Sermon on the Mount. Guess what's emphasized again? The kingdom of heaven. It starts off, blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You've got that emphasis that drives all the way through. All right, at the end of 7, the multitudes were astounded because Jesus spoke with authority and not as the scribes. And so in chapters 8 and 9, we have about 10 separate what? Miracles that show that he had the power and authority to speak as he did. And then in chapter 10, he's ready to send the disciples, they're apostles by now, not to any of the villages of the Samaritans or to the Gentiles, but rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, the limited commission. And there are some things that you might have noticed in your reading. There are some things in the limited commission that you could catapult into the Great Commission, because he mentions you'll be delivered up not only to the synagogues, but you'll be before kings. Well, that didn't happen until the journeys. And so it's almost like a preliminary, and he's warning them about persecution that would come. And they just need to remember that the very hairs of their head are numbered, and there's not a sparrow that falls to the ground without your Father knowing. So if he knows all that, he knows what you're going through. There's some real comfort in those passages. And so he goes on to say, if you confess me before men, what? I'll confess you before my Father who is in heaven. But if you deny me before men, I'll deny you before men. And a man's foes shall be even those of his own house. But you know, so he deals with all those ideas. And then he closes by saying that if people reject you, they reject me. And if they reject me, they reject him who sent you. Yes. All right. Real good. So we don't have a whole lot of time, but let's go right on into where we finished up. We have in the life of Jesus the years of preparation, the beginning ministry, primarily detailed in the book of John. And then we have the great Galilean ministry. And I was thinking as I was preparing, upgrading our charts here, revising our charts, I'm about to run out of review here. And so I'll have to, when we get on farther on, I'll just have to do that. But he goes in, let's go through real quickly the Galilean ministry. He comes up to Cana and heals the nobleman's son who actually was residing over in Capernaum. He leaves Cana and he goes to Nazareth, where he goes in the synagogue. They reject him and they want to do what? Push him off the cliff. And then he goes to Capernaum, makes that his own city. He calls which 4 disciples and says, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Who are they? Peter, Andrew, James, and John. He goes into the synagogue on a Sabbath and he heals a demoniac. And some of the demons were crying out, this is the Christ of God, true or false? That's exactly right. And then he tours, then he goes right after leaving the synagogue into Peter's house and heals his mother-in-law who was sick of a fever. And then he tours Galilee preaching and healing. Then he heals a leper. It creates a whole lot of excitement. The leper had faith to say, if you just would, you could make me whole, cleansed. The lepers were always cleansed, not healed. And so he stretched forth his hand, and what happened? He was cleansed. And so then we move to Mark, the 2nd chapter, and the paralytic is let down through the ceiling, the roof, by the 4 men who helped him. He calls Matthew, the tax collector, and then Matthew follows Jesus, and then he makes a feast for Jesus, and then that runs into what we have there. As he's feasting with Matthew and his fellow publicans and sinners, the Pharisees and some of John's disciples come over and they say, why are you doing that when it's a fast day? And so he defends himself, defends them for feasting rather than fasting. And then he attends a feast and heals the lame man in John 5. And how old was he? Or how long, rather, had he been in the infirmity? 38 years. What's the pool? Pool of Bethesda. Yeah, don't get it confused with the pool of Siloam. Just think B comes before S, right? It's in the north. It comes before the south. If that helps you remember. But the pool of Bethesda is up the north by the sheep gate. And we had all pictures and maps and all that. So he defends them, and then he basically, the rest of the chapter is really a treatise on the fact that Jesus is what? The Christ. He's the Son of God. He's equal with the Father. Right. All right. And then we move to Matthew 12 and Mark 3, and the disciples pluck grain on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees object. And Jesus goes back and says, well, what about David when he was going, he went to the village of Nob, and he was hungry. Saul was after him. And during the days of Abiathar, actually Ahimelech. And what did Ahimelech do? He gave him bread that was the showbread, and that was lawful for him to do, right? No, it was unlawful. And they justified David, but what? Condemned Jesus Christ. And so Jesus put them to flight about that. Then what you studied Sunday morning, Jesus heals the man with the withered hand on the Sabbath. So he goes into the synagogue, and what prompts, since you've already read it, and all we lack are the questions, what prompted Jesus to heal him? That's right. It was a question of the Pharisees. And they said, well, let's look at our text here. What did they say that prompted him to do this? That's right. They just go ahead and ask him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And he makes it's not found in each of the accounts. I think it's, let me look. Let's see. In Matthew's account, he made a point. The Pharisees thought it was okay if you had an animal that was what? In a ditch to do what? To get it out on the Sabbath day. And that was not a violation of the Sabbath. And so what they were doing was they were putting more value on what? On an animal than a man. Kind of like the PETA people. People for the ethical treatment of animals, save the seals, save this, but we can abort a baby. That's basically how distorted, convoluted the thinking is. Notice in Matthew 12, verse 9. He departed thence and went into their synagogue. That would be the synagogue of these Pharisees who evidently had been objecting to their eating the grain on the Sabbath. And they ask him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. So it's not, a matter of wanting truth. They were just looking for something to accuse him. And so he said, what man shall there be of you that shall have one sheep? And if this fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man of more value than a sheep? Do you notice as we go through the life of Jesus, Jesus made everything real simple, where you couldn't help but understand it. He made the comparisons where it just hit them square between the eyes. Wherefore it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Well, the obvious answer is what? Yes, it's obviously good to do right on the Sabbath, to do good. So he said to him, stretch forth your hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole as the other. But the Pharisees went out and took counsel against him, how they might destroy him. Not in Matthew's account, but in Mark's. With whom did they consult that they might destroy him? The Herodians, right. And so here's another case, and we'll say more about this in just a minute. Let's go ahead and answer our questions. On page 47N, all right, did this occur on the same day of the preceding event? Note Luke 6, verse 6. Yes or no? No, it was another Sabbath, yes. So, as time is progressing, we have Jesus doing these things on the Sabbath, and not only is he teaching, working miracles to substantiate his claims for being God's Son, but he's also showing the hypocrisy of these religious leaders and what really the true Sabbath law was all about. Number 2, notice that this man did not ask to be healed, and neither did Jesus at first offer to heal him. But what prompted his healing? Brother Gene answered that a while ago, but anybody? What is it? There was a question. The scribes and Pharisees asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Number 3, before Jesus healed the man's hand, he answered the Pharisees' question with a question. From other Talmud writings, it seems the Jews considered it lawful to help an animal in distress. How then does Jesus again turn the tables on the Pharisees and expose their hypocrisy by his question? Well, by their own reasoning, they did what? They made a sheep more valuable than a man. Exactly. All right, what was their response to Jesus' answer? Mark 3, verse 4. They were silent. Yeah, they held their peace. They had him. He had them, rather. Number 5, since they could not defeat Jesus' words or deeds, what did they attempt to do to him, and why? To destroy him, right? And why? Yes, they were filled with rage. One thing I did not mention in the notes, if you look at Mark's account real quickly, Mark 3, there's something mentioned in verse 5, not mentioned in Matthew or Luke's account, and that's Jesus' reaction. What is it? He was angry. When he looked about them, he was angry, though, because of their what? The hardness of their hearts. It's not a personal vendetta, but it's like, you ought to know better than that, and you do know better than that. You're being untrue to yourself. And when we know there are people in politics and other places that are just lying, you know they're lying. Nothing makes sense. You just follow the money trail, but you know it aggravates you to no end that these people are lying and they're trying to get people to believe a lie, and you know they're lying and they know they're lying. And that's what was going on with Jesus. He looked upon them. They're just after catching him in something that they can lasso over him and try to make him look bad. They're not interested in truth. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes. 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 All of it, follow the money even with the religious leaders. That's right, Brother Gene. Good point. Good point. All right. Number 6. Who joined with the Pharisees against Jesus in this effort? The who? The Herodians, yes. The Herodians are only mentioned in two different occasions. They're mentioned in this. They're mentioned twice in the parallel accounts in one occasion, and then one other time toward the end of Jesus' life. And there's not a whole lot known about them, but I'd like for us to look up here at the chart just for a moment. And I actually lifted something that I got out of the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. Some of you may have it. It's a fairly old work, but it's a very detailed, very exhaustive work. And so here is the Greek word is this, which shows that the word Herodian is just an anglicized word. It's a Greek word that has been put into English. A party twice mentioned in the Gospels, Matthew 22 and the parallel in Mark 12. And then also in chapter 3, verse 6, which is where we are. As acting with the Pharisees in opposition to Jesus. They were not a religious sect, but as the name implies, a court or political party, supporters of the dynasty of Herod. Nothing is known of them beyond what the Gospels state. Whatever their political aims, they early perceived that Christ's pure and spiritual teaching on the kingdom of God was irreconcilable with these, and that Christ's influence with the people was antagonistic to their interests. Hence, in Galilee, on the occasion of the healing of the man with the withered hand, which is where we are right now, they readily joined with the more powerful party of the Pharisees in plots to crush Jesus. And again in Jerusalem in the last week of his life, they renewed this alliance in the attempt to entrap Jesus on the question of the tribute money. Is it lawful to pay tribute to Caesar? You remember that? And Jesus said, give me a denarii. They did. He says, whose image and superscription? And they said, Caesar. Render unto Caesar, you remember, the things that are Caesar. The warning of Jesus to his disciples to beware of the leaven of Herod in Mark 8 verse 15 may have reference to the insidious spirit of his party. So you would say they're not necessarily a religious party as much as they would have been a Jewish party that was really supportive of the political. They were more political in nature. Yeah, they were among the Jews, but they were really just a political party. Exactly. Yes. Yes. And so, yeah, I don't know if you heard, Lee, politics makes strange bedfellows. It's interesting. What's the old phrase? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, you know, so here you have the Pharisees, enemies of Jesus. Well, so were the Herodians, but they became friends with the Pharisees. It's interesting. It's been my observation even in churches when there will be maybe somebody does something that somebody doesn't like, or her feelings are hurt, and a party develops, a schism develops in a church. And people who would not have even hardly spoken to each other in previous times become the fastest of friends because they have a common enemy. And anyway, that's the same thing you had right here. I've quoted this kind of a lengthy part to McGarvey's fourfold gospel on this chart, that he said some things about this very thing I wanted to share with you. Their real motive, that is the Pharisees' real motive, was envious hatred, what Brother Gene was referring to. But their pretext was a zeal for the law. That is, you know, he's violating the Sabbath. Well, he really wasn't. That it was not a genuine zeal for the law is shown by the fact that they consulted with the Herodians or the adherents of Herod Antipas, as they also did afterwards in the passages we've already noticed. They needed the secular power of the Herodians to secure the death of Jesus. Its efficiency for such ends had just been shown in the imprisonment of John the Baptist. But the Herodians were no friends of the Jewish law. In fact, they were real perverters of that law, which Jesus merely correctly interpreted. This party and its predecessors had flatteringly tried to make a Messiah of Herod the Great and had been friends of Rome and patrons of Gentile influence. They favored the erection of temples for idolatrous ends, pagan theaters and games, and Gentile customs generally. Unlike Jesus, the Pharisees grew angry and sinned, for it was against their conscience to consort with the Herodians. But they had to put their conscience in their back pocket, and align themselves with a political party in order to do what? To get rid of Jesus. Yeah, that shows you how far hatred, religious hatred, can carry people. It's not dead. It's really not dead. So I wanted to really show. Any other comments on any of this? All right. Well, let's move on then. Jesus withdraws from his enemies in Matthew and Mark in this section. Let's read this. We got about 7 or 8 minutes. In Matthew 12, if you're still there. Now, let's go to Matthew 12. And I want us to make sure we follow the context. What has happened now is on 2 or 3 different Sabbaths, the Pharisees have been on Jesus' heels trying to, pin him to the ground on all of this. And so now they've not ratcheted it up a step. They've gotten with the Herodians and let's kill this fella. So Jesus knows that. And what does he do in verse 15? This is Matthew 12:15. He withdraws himself from them. And I think it's interesting when you compare Matthew and Mark's accounts. Matthew emphasizes Jesus' withdrawal from these people and how he fulfills Isaiah in the passage about him. Mark's account emphasizes the fact that Jesus continued to have followers from all over the country and how he didn't miss a one of them. He healed all of them. So you got a little different emphasis. And you might have noticed that my heading is a little different from the Waldron's. My heading is Jesus withdraws from his enemies, and I think the Waldron's have that Jesus continues to teach and heal multitudes, something like that. Well, he did both. I just kind of followed a little bit more in Matthew's account. All right, David, if you would, read for us Matthew 12, 15 through 21. All right, I want you to notice now, as Jesus perceived it, that is their counsel, how they wanted to destroy him, he withdrew from there, and we'll find that in Mark's account that he went over by the Sea of Galilee. Well, that was close, of course, to Capernaum. And many followed him, he healed them, but he told them not to do what? Not to make him known. Wrong people, wrong time, to do that. And then in verse 17, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken through Isaiah. This has been, to me, one of those most beautiful passages of prophecy concerning the very nature of Jesus and how he responded to vicious enemies. And and I'll have this on a chart, and it's not in the notes that you have, but I'm going to put it in some new notes. There are basically three phases to this. First, he says that this is my chosen, this is the anointed, and everything he does is right because I put my spirit upon him. And as I do that, verse 19, he's not going to go down the streets of Capernaum and then try to get on a plane to Rome and say, I have my rights, and they're violating them. What does he do? He does not strive nor cry aloud, neither shall anyone hear his voice in the streets. He's not protesting, carrying placards and saying, Jesus of Nazareth, human rights violated. He just withdraws himself. And then in this sense, in verse 20, a bruised reed shall he not break, and smoking flax shall he not quench. Two ideas there. A bruised reed would be like one of these long stalks that would grow by the river, and it wouldn't take much wind, and they would fall over, and then they would basically bend and be bruised, and most of the time people would just do what? Cut them down. Then, so a bruised reed he will not break. He'll not cut it off. And then smoking flax, here's that little material that would be down in a little lamp, and it would be a flame that would give light in a house. A flax, kind of like a wick. We would call it a wick. And if there were some impurities and it would begin to smoke a little bit, the idea is just tear it out or just snuff it out. But a smoking flax, he will not quench. He'll not just get rid of it. He'll try to fan it to flames and make it useful. Evidently, that's kind of a figurative reflection of the people that he's dealing with, that are not the Pharisees, but these people who are penitent and remorseful and sick, and he's healing them, and he's got concern for all these people, and all of this will continue on until he send forth judgment unto victory. That is, until his mission is accomplished, and in his name shall the Gentiles hope. It's interesting, Mark includes a number of people who likely were Gentiles. And all of this he's including, and so through him, the Gentiles would find hope. Ultimately, they would through what? Go into all the world and preach the gospel. They would enjoy the right of salvation to the gospel. All right, let's turn quickly to Mark's account, Mark 3. And I want you to notice, while the emphasis in Matthew was Jesus' reaction to these Pharisees, and rather than, shouting about his rights in the street and stirring up an army to fight them, he just withdraws to the sea. But all of these people, notice in verse 7 of Mark 3, Jesus with his disciples withdrew to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed, and look at all these places, Galilee, from Judea, down where Jerusalem is, from Jerusalem it's mentioned, from Idumea, which was all the way on down past the Dead Sea, another name for Edom, and beyond the Jordan, another name for, starts with a P, Perea, and about Tyre and Sidon, major cities of Phoenicia. So you have all over the countryside, people were following him. A great multitude, hearing what great things he did, came unto him. And he spake to his disciples that a little boat should wait on him because of the crowd, lest they should throng him. For he had healed many, insomuch that as many as had plagues pressed upon him, that they might touch him. And the unclean spirits, whensoever they beheld him, fell down before him and cried, saying, Thou art the Son of God. And he charged them much that they should not make him known. Same time frame, a little different emphasis in Mark relative to the followers of Jesus, and then in Matthew's account, his reaction to these enemies of his. All right. I wanted to share with you, and then we'll stop. 3 phases of his work are here prophesied. First, he shall not strive nor cry aloud, neither shall anyone hear his voice in the streets, describes his reaction to his enemies. He's the Prince of Peace. You remember that from Isaiah. He did not excite warfare. He didn't raise an army. And Brother Bowles, in his commentary on Matthew, says it is this characteristic in Jesus which has separated Christians from carnal warfare. Second, and this is from the passage, a bruised reed shall he not break, smoking flax shall he not quench, shows his encouraging care for his followers. So you got the enemies, the followers. Rather than break off a bruised reed or snuff out a smoking flax, Jesus would heal their bruises and fan into flames their dying energies. Well, that's what we're to do, isn't it? Ye that are, brethren, if any man be overtaken in a fault, ye who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness or gentleness, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And in 2 Timothy 2:24, the Lord's servant must not strive, but be gentle toward all. And so there's that, even in dealing with people, there's so far you can go when people are not what they ought to be. Likely this figuratively reflects these followers who were weak, sick, lame, blind, but unlike the Pharisees were contrite, poor in spirit, remorseful, and penitent. Everyone was important to Jesus. And then the third thing, till he sends forth justice to victory, and in his name Gentiles will trust, indicates Christ would continue his mission with mercy and forbearance, eventually triumphing over this Jewish opposition that he was against, and bringing hope even to the Gentiles through the gospel. Ephesians 3:3-7. That says, to wit, that the Gentiles are fellow heirs, fellow members of the body, fellow partakers of the Spirit, through fellow partakers of the promise through the gospel. Comment, question on any of this? Our time is shot, guys. You didn't run out of time Sunday, did you, Brother Charlie? No, you had plenty of time. We'll just have to stop. But honestly, when we don't rush through, but try to cover it thoroughly and then move on, you just see the depth of the account that here Isaiah was predicting some of the very reactions of Jesus to those people who were trying to kill him at this time. And there's a great teaching for us that we don't respond. If your enemy hunger, what did Paul say in Romans 12? Feed him. Yeah, if he thirsts, give him to drink, and in so doing you'll heap coals of fire on his head. And so don't be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. And those are, we see those passages, or we see it in, as NBC used to say, in living color with the life of Jesus.